Have you ever felt defeated trying to garden in the summer heat? Gardening in hot climates like Zone 9 can feel impossible. Plants wilt, soil dries out, and sometimes it feels like nothing will survive. But with the right strategies, you can beat the heat and still get a productive harvest. And if you're new here, welcome. I'm Audrey Crawford, a lifelong gardener from the Central Valley of California, and this is the Audrey's Little Farm Show, where I take the guesswork out of gardening and help you grow a successful garden one simple step at a time. Today, we're tackling one of the most common issues I hear from gardeners, especially those of you gardening in zones like mine, Zone 9, and that is gardening in the heat. Summers can be absolutely brutal. When temperatures rise into the triple digits and the sun feels like it's just baking your garden beds, it's very easy to feel like nothing will grow. But with a few smart shifts, like choosing the right crops, timing your planting well, and protecting your soil, you can have a thriving garden even in the heat of summer. So let's walk through how to grow a successful garden through the heat of summer and still get a harvest. But first, let's talk about why the heat causes so many problems. So most plants stop growing or drop flowers when temperatures go over 90 degrees Fahrenheit consistently. However, I will say that this truly depends on your exact climate because we have many days in the hundreds throughout summer. In fact, I think last summer, every day of July was over 100. But we still cool off quite a bit at night, usually into the 70s, and we have very low humidity, and so I don't have any issues with crops producing throughout the summer. However, if you're in an area where the nights don't cool off and you have high humidity, then it's very common for you to probably struggle a little bit more getting that harvest throughout summer. But just know that if your nights do cool off and you have that lower humidity, you're likely going to have more success. The next issue with the heat is that soil moisture evaporates faster, which can lead to stressed, undernourished plants. The other issue is that microbial life in the soil slows down, which impacts nutrient availability for our plants. And if you're not watering deeply, roots tend to stay shallow right where the soil heats up the most. So what we want to do is reduce stress, protect the soil, and choose crops that actually like the heat. So let's start by covering some tips that will help you throughout the heat of summer. And first step is using shade cloth, which can be a lifesaver during. And the first tip is to use shade cloth. You can use 30 to 50% shade cloth over crops like tomatoes, peppers, and cucumbers to help soften the sun's intensity, especially during the hottest part of the day, usually between noon and 5 p.m. Next up is mulching. If you are not already using mulch, start now. A thick layer of mulch, about 4 to 6 inches, will keep the soil cooler, reduce evaporation, protect soil life, and feed the soil as it breaks down, not to mention it helps suppress the weeds. Some of my favorite mulch materials include straw, shredded leaves, and grass clippings. The next tip is deep, infrequent watering. Rather than watering a little bit every day, water deeply a few times a week. This trains the roots to go down deep where the soil stays cooler and wetter, although depending on how hot it is, you might still have to water daily or every other day, but just remember to water slow and deeply. If you can, use drip irrigation or soaker hoses to water slowly and at the root zone. This is going to minimize waste and it's going to keep the leaves of the plants drier, which will help prevent disease depending on which climate you're in. The last tip is plant timing. In Zone 9, our seasons shift early. You want to plant your heat-loving crops in spring after all danger of frost has passed, when the weather is consistently in the 70s and above, but before the worst part of summer kicks in. This gives your plants time to establish, then start your fall crops in late summer, even though it still feels hot outside. But as I say this, I also want to encourage you to still plant a summer garden even if you miss that initial planting window. Even though ideally it's great for our crops to get established before that insanely hot stretch of weather, you can still plant throughout the summer. In fact, I always try to plant usually in mid-April to mid-May, but I still plant crops throughout June and July, either to fill in a space where something died, where pests took over, or simply to just extend the harvest window with younger crops. So definitely don't be afraid to plant if it feels too hot outside. You still have time, and if you plant the correct crops that love the heat, they're still going to grow. And now for my favorite part, which is what to actually plant. If you pick the right crops, your garden can thrive even in triple-digit weather. In fact, I have a full list of some of my favorite summer crops to grow that you can grab in the description below. But for right now, I will just highlight the crops that thrive in the heat. I'm not going to go into the exact variety names of everything. Those are all in the list below. But my best tip for you is to choose hybrids. They are bred to withstand heat, humidity, and disease, and so simply by choosing hybrid varieties, you're going to have better success growing in the intense heat of summer than if you choose only heirlooms. But here are the crops that love the heat the most, and that is beans, corn, cucumbers, eggplant, okra, peppers, summer squash, pumpkins, tomatoes, sweet potatoes, tomatillos, and winter squash. These crops don't just survive, they thrive in warm weather when planted and cared for properly. But depending on the variety that you grow will determine the success. So say you plant tomatoes one year, but you only plant heirloom varieties. There's a very good chance that they're going to struggle through the intense heat of summer. However, if you grow hybrid tomatoes, they should thrive throughout the heat of summer. And so don't think a crop can't thrive in the heat, because it might not be the crop's fault, it's likely the variety. However, there are going to be weeks when it's just too hot for anything. And in those times, it's okay to pause. You can protect your soil with mulch or cover crops. You can focus on building your compost pile. You can start planning for your fall garden, or just let the garden rest and take a rest yourself. Gardening is a long game, and it's better to give yourself a break than to try to force things to work when it's really hot outside and it's just not enjoyable, and then end up feeling discouraged. But I also want to take a minute to go a little deeper into one of the tips I mentioned earlier, and that was using shade cloth. Because while it's a total game changer for gardening in hot climates, it can backfire if it's used the wrong way. So let's break it down. First off, what kind of shade cloth should you use? For most vegetable gardens, the sweet spot is between 30% and 50% shade. This means it filters out 30 to 50% of the sunlight. If you're growing fruiting crops like tomatoes, peppers, squash, or cucumbers, stick with a 30% shade cloth. That gives your plants some relief from the heat without blocking the sunlight they need to bloom and produce fruit. You can go up to 50% if you're in an intense heat wave, but I would not keep that much shade on full time. It can slow down flowering and reduce your harvest if your plants aren't getting enough light. The second thing to keep in mind is when you're shading your plants. So plants still need sun to grow, especially in order to bloom and fruit. So rather than leaving the shade cloth up all day, try to only block the sun during the hottest part of the day, usually between noon and 5 p.m., being that your plants already got their minimum 6 hours of sunlight. If they don't get any sunlight in the morning and the only chance for them to get light is in the afternoon, they need to get that light first before you shade. You can do this by creating a setup that's either removable or adjustable. For example, you can attach shade cloth to PVC hoops or metal garden stakes using binder clips or clothespins. That way you can just pull it over in the afternoon and then roll it back in the morning or the evening when the sun isn't quite as intense. If you're using hoops, another thing to watch for is airflow. Make sure the cloth is held at least a foot or two above the plants so that it doesn't trap the heat underneath. You want to keep things cooler, not create a mini greenhouse. So give your plants room to breathe. And if you're growing taller plants like tomatoes or pole beans, you can even try just draping the cloth over the top of the plants or on the west side of the garden bed. That way your plants still get full morning sun, but just a little bit of shade in the afternoon when they need it most. And last but not least, pay attention to how your plants are responding. If you notice that they're getting leggy or not blooming well, they might be getting too much shade. In that case, back off a little bit, either shorten the time the shade is up or use a lighter cloth. So just remember that shade cloth is an incredible tool for summer gardening, but it works best when you use it strategically. It shouldn't be up all summer long. So if summer heat has you second guessing your garden plans, don't give up. With the right strategies and plant choices, you can beat the heat and grow an amazing harvest, even in zone 9 and beyond. So if you want a full breakdown of all of my favorite heat-tolerant vegetables and the specific varieties I've had success with, head to the link in the description because I have a free list of my most favorite summer vegetables that you can download. And if you'd love extra help planning your seasonal garden step by step, come join me inside Audrey's Little Farm Academy. I have resources and trainings designed specifically for gardeners like you, and there's even other information you can dive into on topics like canning and chickens and all of those other fun things. So until next time, stay cool and happy gardening.